Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster high-power diode wiring kit on our 2013 Lincoln. Now whenever you want to flat tow your Lincoln, it's going to be very important to have functioning lights back here. Because whenever you're pulling with your motorhome, the car most likely is going to block a little bit of the taillights, and when you have something behind you, whether it is a vehicle or a trailer, we got to have those lights so everyone around us knows what's going on. Whether we're driving down the highway, we need to change lanes, we're driving at night, all of those signals are very important to safety and making sure that we're staying legal. One of my favorite things about the diodes is the fact that it's not going to change the outward appearance of our Lincoln. Unlike those other kinds, we've all seen them, those magnetic lights, where usually you stick them to the top of the body somewhere, and that definitely will get those signals to the back. But that requires an extra step every time we hook up and we want to tow. We're going to have to put the lights on, run the wire all the way to the back of the motorhome, plug it in. Then we have that wire dangling as we're going down the road. Not to mention once we're done towing, we got to find somewhere to put them and keep track of all those pieces. But with our diodes, it's a one-time installation. Everything is set up one time. So once we go to hook up, all we got to do is plug up the electrical cord that connects our motorhome to the front of our Lincoln, and everything will work seamlessly. Now the diodes are a little bit small, so they're actually going to fit behind our taillights and wire in. Now the other nice thing about them is the fact that they are going to protect our Lincoln's electrical system. Let's say there was a problem on the motorhome end, on the trailer wiring, it's going to prevent any kind of backfeeding from the motorhome going through our Lincoln. So we don't have to worry about any kind of shorts or anything like that from the motorhome. Our taillight circuits are going to be nice and protected on our Lincoln. And our diodes are also going to come with a socket to mount on the front of your Lincoln, because obviously we've got to plug something in. It's also going to come with a coiled cable. One end will be a 7-way, which most RVs have to plug directly in there. And then we'll have the 6-way to match the socket on the front of our Lincoln. Now I like the coiled cables, especially if your tow bar doesn't have channels in them, because it can stretch out quite a bit so we get all the slack we need, but it coils back up into a nice neat little package, so we don't have to worry about all that cable dragging on the ground and potentially getting damaged. Now our diode kit is going to come with everything you need to get it installed. However, we did end up using a little bit of extra wire just because of the length of our Lincoln, but it is going to come with a 4-pole wire, all the connectors, the diodes, as well as the cable. And just so you can have the confidence to do it at home, let's go ahead and go through the installation process together, and we'll show you exactly which wire we need to tap into and how to test for all your circuits. To begin our installation, we want to start our wiring wherever you're going to be mounting your plug. Now obviously we have the front end of our fascia taken off right now, and that's because we just got done installing our base plate. And I always recommend at least routing your wires while it's off, because it will make it a lot easier to access all of this area here. But we want to start your wire, have a little bit left at the end so you can wire your plug up, but we want to start routing our wire towards the back. Now, you want to make sure that you stay away from anything too hot or anything that may be sharp and damage the wire. So anything moving like the suspension, steering, or anything really hot like the exhaust. But we started routing ours. We came across the front of the base plate, and then right here underneath the headlight, we started routing it going down, meeting up at the frame. So our wire came down right here in the front. You do want to be mindful because we got our transmission here and some lines, so just watch how you drop it down. But then I used some zip ties to secure it to the frame, started moving back, went underneath the transmission, making sure we cleared the power steering rack there, and then we started routing it again towards the back. Fortunately, we have this really large panel here, so I just used that to cover up the wire, make sure it's protected, and continue to run it along the side until we got to about the fuel tank. Then I went further towards the edge using these factoring lines, emergency cable, and everything else to secure it down. Went over this brace, went around the rear subframe, went over the rear axle, all of these components, just slipped right over, and then right back here by the filler neck, I went over the filler neck. And fortunately for us, again, we had this really large heat shield above the muffler. So I ran the wire over the top of the heat shield, and I have it coming out right here at the back of the bumper. Now at this point, you should still have a decent amount of wire and slack left, But we need to separate all these wires so we can have 4 separate ones rather than a bundle. Typically, you just take a pair of cutters. We're going to cut right in between each one of the wires. You want to be really careful not to damage the wire. We'll just make a small cut. You usually grab the wire and just start pulling them apart. And again, we want to pull them apart as high up as we can go, so as close to that heat shield as you can get it. And we're just going to do that for all 4 wires until they're all separated. So now we want to move up top. We're going to open up our rear hatch, and just on the inside we're going to have 2 bolts that are holding our taillights in place. So we're going to grab an 8mm socket, and we'll pull both of those out. And once you have those removed, you want to grab the taillight and pull it as straight back as you can. There are some alignment pins on the side, so we don't want too much twisting action because we don't want those to break. If you can usually get behind it, and again, pull as straight back as you can. Maybe a little snug trying to get it out, but you can get it loose. Once you get it loose, we can come back to the connector on the back of the taillight and go ahead and push in on the tab and disconnect it. Now we're going to have the same setup over on the other side, so we want to remove the 2 bolts and pull that taillight out as well. Now you want to go ahead and pull the tape off of the connector and the wires that are going to the taillight connector. That way we can get access and see what color wires, and then we're going to test for what each function they do. So right now I turn my headlights on. There's no other function. We don't have the brakes on, turn signals, just the headlights. So our taillights should be on. And we're going to take my tester and I'm going to check each one of the pins on the connector to see which one is activating. So if we're looking at the connector, it's going to be the bottom left pin, and that's if that tab's on top. So if we look at the back of the plug, we can see that it's going to correspond with a lime green wire with a yellow stripe on it. So we want to make sure we write that down, or remember that the green wire with the yellow stripe is going to be our taillight function on the driver's side. So now that we have identified our taillight function, we need to identify our brake function. So I have someone pressing on the brake pedal right now, but I also turned off my taillights. So if we check that taillight pin, we're not getting any kind of signal. But we need to recheck all of these to find the brake signal. So our brake signal on the driver's side is going to be the top left pin. And if we look at the back of the connector, it's going to correspond with the gray wire with the brown stripe. Now again, we need to find that signal over on the passenger side as well. So over on the passenger side, our brake wire and taillight wire are going to be in the same locations on the top and bottom left pin if you look at the square piece on top. So we still have our brakes on, still going to be that top pin on the passenger side, but the wires are going to be slightly different colored. The brake wire on the passenger side is a purple wire with an orange stripe, and then the taillight wire is still going to be that green with a yellow stripe on it. And we need to get our wires that we routed to the back up to the taillight pocket so we can start making our connections. Now I'm going to use an Airline tube. I'm going to pass it down between the fascia and the body so that we can meet up with those wires and bring them up top. Now you can use just about whatever you have available. A coat hanger, sometimes even just a string with something heavy attached to it. You can use it to drop down and let gravity work on your side. But we want to pass this Airline tube all the way down until we can get access underneath, and we want to bring up the white wire, the brown wire, and the yellow wire on the driver's side. We're going to pull all the slack up of those 3 wires. And it's not a bad idea to go back underneath, double check that there's not a wad to get wrapped around anything. But another thing that I like to do is I'm going to take all that slack, make sure the wires are nice and taut, and then I'm going to put an anchor point right against the factory wires. That way we don't have to worry about this end falling back down and landing on anything or getting caught. So just take a zip tie and we can secure it to that factory wiring there, make sure everything's not going to move on us. So we're going to start with our brake wire, which is going to be that gray wire with a brown stripe on the driver's side. So we want to come to the plug, maybe just come back maybe an inch, a couple inches. I'm going to cut that wire in half. Then we want to strip back both ends. We want to grab one of the diodes that has all the blue connectors. And we're going to take two of them. And we're going to crimp them right onto the wires that we just stripped. We'll take our yellow wire. I like to give myself a little bit of slack, but we need it to be at least as long as the Spade terminal that's furthest away from the plug. So just come up a little bit past that, cut the wire, strip back the end of it. We're going to take the last blue Spade terminal off our diode and we'll crimp it in place. Now if we grab our diode, we can look and see that there's going to be a total of 3 terminals on there. There will be 2 on the inside and 1 on the outside. The out terminal is going to be the one closest to the taillight socket, so we'll plug that one into the out terminal. And then the other 2 are going to go into the in terminal. It doesn't matter which one you plug in where, you just want to make sure that the yellow wire is going to in and the wire furthest away from the socket is also going to in. Now we can go ahead and get ready to make our taillight connections. It's going to be the same process of cutting that wire in half, stripping back both ends, except this time we want to grab the diode that has the yellow Spade terminal on it, but we're going to use the 2 blue to go onto the factory wire here. I'm going to grab our diode, pull that last yellow Spade terminal off, and again you want to make sure that one closest to the socket goes to out, and then the other factory wire will go to the in. We'll grab our brown wire, again give yourself a little bit of slack, trim it off, except this time we want to hold on to the excess wire. We're going to strip back the free end of the excess wire and the end that's coming from the top. We'll take both of those wires together now. We're going to combine them. And that's the main reason for that yellow Spade terminal. When you combine these 2 wires together, and it's much easier to crimp on this larger terminal than trying to cram both of those wires into one of the blue Spade terminals. Make sure we got a solid connection, and we can plug it in. And that'll finish up the driver's side connections. For our white wire, this is going to be our ground, so we need to find a grounding point that we can attach this to. Your kit's going to come with a ring terminal and a self-tapping screw, so I think I'm going to mount mine actually down here at the bottom of the taillight pocket against the body. So I'll just go ahead and trim off the excess wire and strip back the end of it. We want to grab the ring terminal out of our kit, slide it over the end of your wire and crimp it in place. And again, they are going to give you a self-tapping screw. I'm going to get the screw started, make the hole, and then put the ring terminal in place. That way we don't have to worry about the wire winding up on me. We'll just go right into that pocket. The metal does double up there, it's pretty thick, so we get a nice solid connection point. And then we'll just put our ring terminal around the screw, make sure it's nice and secure. Now the big thing when it comes to these ring terminals is you want to make sure that it's nice and tight, it's not spinning around, but you also don't want to break the head off the screw or strip it out. So that brown wire that we need to send down to the bottom and over to the passenger side, most likely you're not going to have enough wire to reach. So you probably will need to pick up a little bit of extra wire. I just happen to have brown wire here, but I'm going to go ahead and take my excess wire and I'm going to strip back the ends. I'm going to connect it using that butt connector they give us in our kit. That way I know I have enough to go back down and reach to the passenger side. So now once we have all of our connections made on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and plug our taillights back in. Make sure that all of your diodes will fit behind the taillight, and if it does, we'll go ahead and reposition our taillight, make sure it clicks in all the way, and then we can replace the factory fasteners. Now at this point, all of our wiring is in place, and we really just need to wire up the plug that's going to go on the front of our Lincoln. But as you can see, like I said at the beginning, the fascia is removed because we just got done with our base plate. So we're actually going to have to put the fascia on now, so that way we can actually get it over and have the plug on the outside. So we're going to go ahead and get our fascia in place, and then we'll show you how exactly to wire up that socket. With the fascia back on, we want to grab the socket, we can start wiring it up. On the back, we're going to have this rubber boot. Go ahead and pull it off, take all the wires on the front, pass them through the small hole, and for now, we can just kind of push it back out of the way. Now I do want to mention we have an extra wire up here, and that's because it's our charge line. Now you may or may not have this on your application, but wiring it up is going to be the same process. We need to split each one of these wires. We don't need to go that far back like we did at the back of the car, but we need to get access so we can mess with each individual wire. So the same thing, you just want to take a pair of cutters, cut right in between each wire, and then we can just split them back maybe a few inches or so. Then we want to strip back each one of the wires. So we got a little bit of copper showing. Then we can bring our attention to the actual socket itself. If we look at the back here, each one of these terminals is going to be labeled. So we want to make sure that we can read them and make sure we get the correct wire in each one. So if we start at the very top, the 12 o'clock position, it's going to be labeled TM for trailer marker. That'll be your brown wire. If we move in a counterclock motion here, the next one is going to be a larger terminal. It's going to be labeled GD for ground. The next one will be LT for left turn. That'll be your yellow wire. RT for right turn. That'll be your green wire. Then this one right here is going to be labeled S. That'll be your electric brake signal. And then the center one is going to be your 12-volt power source. That's where we're going to hook up our charge line. Now each one of these terminals is just going to have a really small set screw. So you just want to take a small Phillips head screwdriver, loosen it up. I always recommend leaving the screw in and not fully taking it out just because it is really small and they're very easy to lose. Then we'll just take the corresponding wire with the terminal. We can put the wire inside, and you just want to tighten down the screw so it holds that wire in there. What I do always recommend is that you leave just a tiny, tiny bit of copper outside of the terminal. That way we don't have to worry about the insulation potentially causing any kind of connection issues. Now once you have all your wires connected, I always recommend putting a little bit of dielectric grease inside the area where all your connectors are, and then I always like to come back and cover up as much of the wire, including the boot, with electrical tape. It'll help protect a little bit better and cover up some of these brightly colored wires on the front of our Lincoln. And then to mount the plug, I'm just going to use a couple self-tapping screws and go into the two rods that are on our base plate. So the final step is going to be testing all the circuits and making sure that the lights work properly. So I went ahead and hooked up my Lincoln to a tester. And I always recommend using a tester, that way if there is any problems on the motorhome side, we can verify and troubleshoot it a little bit easier. If I start running through the lights, we can see my taillight function is working, the left turn signal, my brake lights, and the right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. With all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at etrailer.com. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster high-powered diode wiring kit